The first lecture from this unit really tried to set the scene and to try to give you some background information on some political ideologies that were common prior to World War II and throughout World War II, actually. So this little mini lecture is just going to go over the four dictators that we will be looking at during World War II. The first dictator that we're going to take a look at is Joseph Stalin from the Soviet Union. What we want to understand is that Stalin came after Lenin. And when Lenin was in charge in the Soviet Union, it was a communist society, but it was not nearly as radical as it was when Stalin ends up taking over. Under Lenin, there was still some local land ownership, individual land ownership, but Stalin comes in 1924 and really changes all of that. You can see his quote up there. This is one great leap forward for communism. He's really talking about when he steps in and takes over control of the Soviet Union. Once he was in control, and again, remember, communist nation is a nation that controls the economy of the country, and their government does that by taking over all of the land, right? Because they don't believe in private land ownership. It needs to be public or owned by the government. And because of that, they took over all the farming and the agriculture, and then they really struggled. They actually ended up reducing the food and the resources that are created there, and by forcing people off of their land, by no longer making sure that they're growing enough food of everything that they need, there ends up being a large amount of people that starve during this era. It's estimated anywhere between 5 and 10 million people actually die of starvation while Stalin is in control. Stalin is also known for his purges. These were ways that he would forcefully remove his opposition. And really, his opposition in his mind was anyone that really questioned him or doubted his government style. The next dictator we're going to focus on or talk about here is Mussolini from Italy. So one thing that we have to remember is actually go back to the end of World War I. If you remember, Italy was one of the big four, right? The four main winning powers. So the United States, France, Great Britain, and Italy. However, if you also remember, Italy did not get a lot out of the Treaty of Versailles, and this actually brings some resentment and anger to Italians. And so Mussolini steps into power really on the notion or idea that he wants to restore the power of Italy. While he is in power, he of course uses terror tactics similar to all the other dictators to kind of terrorize those that oppose him. And he promises to help fix the economic issues that were left after World War I. If you remember, there was a lot of damage to the infrastructure in Italy from World War I. And so he steps in, again, promising to bring their economy back and promising to restore the power that they have lost. The next dictator that we're going to look at is Adolf Hitler from Germany. If you remember, right, the end of World War I and the Treaty of Versailles, when we looked at that, we saw that there were major provisions against Germany. Really, the four main ones that we looked at is Germany had to take blame for the war, pay for the war, reduce their military, and they lost territory. So what that ends up doing is actually spinning Germany into a deep economic depression. And so Adolf Hitler is able to use some of that resentment and anger from the people of Germany to come into power. So we'll just kind of go through this one step by step here. He ends up joining the Nazi Party. And again, the Nazi Party is really based on that racial superiority of German people. So we talk about being fascist. Remember, we talk about restoring greatness of maybe race or ethnicity. And that was really one of the goals of the Nazi Party. Early on, he does try to overthrow the government. He is not successful, and he actually ends up spending 9 months in jail. While Hitler's in jail, he writes Mein Kampf, which means my struggle. In that is where he starts to share his ideas of how to revive Germany, how to bring Germany back into power again, how to fix the economy of Germany as well. But also within that, he starts to talk about his hatred of Jewish people, using them as scapegoats and blaming them for the defeat in World War I. He said that Jewish people weakened the population of Germany during World War I and weakened their chance to be successful. So again, he really starts to use people's anger and resentment towards the loss in World War I to gain power. He and the Nazi Party promised to, restore the economy in Germany, and a little bit later on, we'll look at how he plans on doing that. Eventually, he does become the dictator, and he, similar to Mussolini, also has a group of people that he uses to silence his opposition. The last dictator that we're going to look at here is Hideki Tojo of Japan. Japan had a growing population at the time, but we know about Japan, of course, is that it's an island nation and it's not very big. There just simply was not enough space. So they kind of go on this fascist conquest. Again, there's that term fascist or fascism, wanting to claim a superiority of a race potentially, and that's exactly what Tojo felt. So what they started doing is they started expanding as well. Notice the other ones we're talking about are in Europe. Of course, this is in Asia. And really one of the key targets of Japan was China. And there are a few times throughout history that they invade China and try to take over. One time is in 1931 with the Manchurian incident, where again the Japanese invade China, massacring millions of people. You also then have the same thing happening in 1937, where you have large massacres of people as well. Again, the Japanese people really trying to spread the superiority of the Japanese culture around the world, and doing so by invading countries that surround them. Of course, Tojo, his power starts to grow during this time. Originally he starts just controlling the military, then he ends up controlling the economy, and then really just being a fascist dictator.